What's up, everybody? Hope you're all doing great, and today I have a little bit of a different style video for you guys. I recently got a comment on my Halo extraction shooter rant video, which I thought actually made a pretty good point. It was asking, what I think that the Halo franchise needs to do to course correct and what I would do to turn things around for the studio. Kind of trying to go further than my just initial criticism and rant about Halo chasing trends. And I thought that sounded like a really fun video topic. I think the original commenter brought up a great point. It is really easy today to shit on Halo Studios and just the Halo franchise in general and say Bungie did it so much better, but I do think we should take things a step further and talk about what Microsoft needs to do with this franchise to win back some goodwill. And so I'm going to try to break this video up into different sections because I think there's a lot that needs to be done with a flagship franchise that's in such a dire state like it is today. But I would also love to hear your thoughts on what Microsoft should do with Halo and what you would like to see from the IP in the comments below. Let me know if you've got different ideas than me. I would love to hear them. I think it's incredibly important that we make it known what we want with this franchise. And with all of that said, I'm just gonna dive right into it. So the first thing I would do when it comes to Halo is address the studio situation. Halo Studios should be running like a well-oiled machine. Frankly, it hasn't. Whether it's been under the name Halo Studios or 343 Industries, they just have a lot of struggles from an operational standpoint. And that should not be happening, for the flagship franchise of Xbox. This should be, in my opinion, the most well-run studio under their banner because it needs to set the standard for the other studios to follow. So how would I do that? Well, the first thing I would do is bring in completely new leadership, whether that means promoting from within or bringing people from the outside. I do think that we just, again, need to see a complete leadership change over at 343 Halo Studios. I know we've kind of gotten a little bit of that with the ouster of Bonnie Ross, Frank O'Connor, and Kiki Wolfkill, but again, I think there just needs to be a more drastic change. And on that note, if it would be possible to bring back some of the older experts on Halo, the people who made it great in the first place, I would do my absolute best to entice them back into the studio. Not saying that that's a foolproof way to make the games good, but it is a start. So yeah, first order of business is just completely new leadership for the studio. I would let them make the big decisions like what engine is going to be the best for the future of Halo and things like that. Another studio level decision that I would make is completely cutting the reliance on contractors. This is something that a lot of the modern games industry struggles with, and I do think it is a reason for the drop in quality that we see in a lot of modern games. Back in the days of the original Halo trilogy, you had a core team of developers who were working on games and the sequels and taking into consideration player feedback and everything they were learning, and there was a clear vision established from the get-go, and that's just something that we don't have today. It's very difficult to maintain a vision and apply lessons learned when you're constantly cycling in a new workforce every 6 to 12 months. So in addition to changing leadership, I would also say that you need to have a core team of developers. Not saying you can never outsource anything, but significantly reducing the amount of contract-based work we're doing on the Halo franchise. Again, there is really no excuse, in my opinion, for an IP as big as Halo needs to rely so heavily on contractors, and I think getting away from that would result in the most positive change for the studio overall. This next thing that I think needs to be done is actually probably going to be a bit controversial, but I do think it is ultimately necessary to kind of reset the state of the franchise, and that is to reboot the entire thing. It's not just the gameplay consistency that has suffered under 343, the lore has also been completely fucked. 343 has never been able to stick to a single story, and with the introduction of the TV show and so many different diverging plot threads and unanswered questions, I think rather than trying to address all of those things and bring them into a modern Halo game in a satisfactory way, I think it would just be safer to reboot the franchise from the end of the Bungie era. It'd be kind of a similar situation to how Star Wars decanonized Legends and then slowly brought some of that stuff back in. It's just a lot of people weren't a big fan of a lot of the story changes 343 made and all of the retcons and everything. There were just so many controversial decisions, and I just genuinely don't know how you pick up the torch from what the current state of the franchise is and successfully continue that. I think the best order of business, like I said, is just reboot from the end of the Bungie era games and go from there, start fresh, have a clean slate. Again, like I said, that's probably going to be pretty controversial, but I just don't know how you fix the messy state that 343 has left this franchise in otherwise. And real quick, while we're on the topic of rebooting the world and the story of Halo, I do think that whatever comes after a reboot needs to focus solely on a small cast of characters. Chief, Cortana, maybe the Arbiter, and a few others, but none of this, there's 10,000 new Spartans and all of these different casts of characters that we're going to try and fail to juggle. Just personally, I think Halo has always been its best when it's had a very small core cast of characters. That's even true for the spin-offs like ODST and Reach. Just keep it simple. Halo does not need to be this sprawling Game of Thrones level epic. You can keep the narrative and the cast of characters a lot more tight-knit. A lot of people also say that we should swap out Chief for a new protagonist. Personally, I don't agree with that. I feel like that's kind of like swapping the Doomslayer in Doom. It just doesn't work for me personally. Halo and Chief are just pretty synonymous with one another. I just think taking Chief away would hurt the franchise far more than it would help. Chief is just such a timeless protagonist that works for so many different people and is universally loved, and I just don't see how you could replace that with anything that wouldn't be seen as inferior. The next thing I would do is stop limiting the franchise to being developed only under Halo Studios. For decades, people have been asking for Halo spin-offs in the vein of, a Helldivers style game or another ODST game. It's been a while since we got an RTS in the Halo franchise. Other examples include the long-wished-for Flood horror game, and not saying that all of those need to be executed upon, but I do think that Halo as a franchise has significantly underutilized its spin-off potential, and that has kind of led to it becoming less prominent in the overall pop culture space. So yeah, I would definitely expand and allow other studios within reason to develop spin-offs under the Halo umbrella, because I do think limiting it to titles developed under Halo Studios, where it's always just, campaign and multiplayer and maybe Forge or Firefight, I do think that kind of limits the potential of the series as well as its reach. So yeah, I would hand out the IP to some other studios and let them make some really cool spin-offs. But on the topic of the games that would be developed under Halo Studios, they would be content complete at launch. That means you launch the full suite. You launch a complete campaign, a massive multiplayer, Forge or Firefight, preferably at launch, but definitely no more than like 3 months after launch. And then you would ideally have 6 to 12 months of post-launch content almost ready for release. That way, there's no complaints about no Slayer playlist, not enough campaign content, too few multiplayer maps, nothing. We go back to the full package that we're used to getting with Halo. Because if you're gonna charge people $70 for a game, it needs to be a complete package. And as far as what type of content I would continue to add to the game post-launch, that would be things like new modes, new maps, maybe some campaign DLC, firefight updates, and sandbox editions, like new weapons, new vehicles, things like that. The kind of stuff that we're used to getting with Halo, and that used to be the standard. I think launching a complete package like that without any, caveats of, well, you have to wait 6 months for Forge and a year for Firefight would do wonders for the Halo fan base and kind of bring back a lot of the people it's lost over the years. The next thing I would do is stop trend chasing. It seems every time there's a new trend in the industry, especially in the first-person shooter space, that we get a report that Halo is also pursuing that trend, whether it's a battle royale or extraction shooter or whatever. And not saying these things can never be done well under the Halo IP, but I think before Halo can pursue things like that, it needs to get back to the basics first and execute on those. Like I said, campaign, the arena multiplayer, Forge, and Firefight, and then we can start talking about things like Battle Royale and Extraction. But they should definitely not replace the core Halo experience. If anything, they would probably fall under either one of those post-launch modes that I talked about or one of the spin-offs. The next thing I would do is go back to the distinct art style that Halo had. I think they kind of started to do this with Halo Infinite a little bit, but Halo used to be so visually unique, and it definitely lost that visual identity over the years under 343 and Halo Studios, and I think it's important to bring that back. Not saying it needs to look exactly like it did 20 years ago, you can definitely iterate upon things. The art direction just really needs to be on point and consistent with what Halo has looked like historically, because that visual identity and art direction is what set it apart from a lot of sci-fi and other games at the time. And kind of on that same note, I do think when it comes to the gameplay of Halo, nobody wants it to be exactly as it was in Halo Combat Evolved, 25 years ago. There's definitely room for iteration and evolution here, but I think adding in things like sprint and grapple hooks and all of the modern shooter trends we've seen just really isn't the answer for Halo. Honestly, I think Halo Infinite did come really close. Like I said, it did add things like grapple hooks and stuff, but I feel like it did it in a way that still felt close to Halo. Definitely more than, Halo 5 or Halo 4 did. And I think just kind of continuing to push in that direction direction of classic arena shooter gameplay with some modern twists would be great. I don't think sprint is absolutely terrible in Halo, but I do think it needs to be handled a lot more carefully than you would in a game like COD or Battlefield. Personally, for me, I think Halo is the best when we try to evolve it with the sandbox more than anything. You know, new and unique vehicles and weapons to try, maybe some different armor abilities, but kind of keeping that core movement and gunplay very similar to how it used to be. Maybe making it slightly more fast and fluid, you know, to keep up with the pace of modern shooters, but not necessarily on the level of Call of Duty or any of the modern Twitch shooters that we see. But yeah, I think those are all my thoughts on the state of modern Halo. Apologies if some of this was kind of rambly, especially when it comes to things like the art direction and iterating on the gameplay. I feel like a lot of that just kind of needs to be figured out by a good development team. You know, I think you can push Halo in a more modern direction and it could be successful, or you could return it to, you know, its more classic roots and it could be successful. I think there's a bit of a spectrum here on, you know, what you can do with the art and the gameplay, but ultimately I do think that the studio level things and rebooting the franchise and, you know, the core points that I mentioned all kind of need to happen. I just genuinely don't really know that Halo can ever recover from its current state without that. I know they're trying to tap into nostalgia with the campaign remaster, and they're probably going to try and remaster the other Bungie era games, and I just don't see it bringing a ton of people back, if I'm being honest. Like, we have the Master Chief Collection if we want to go play those games. I don't really want to play Combat Evolved executed by people who don't understand what made it great in the first place, and I think a lot of people feel the same. I also don't really want to play a trend-chasing extraction shooter. I just want some classic Halo Arena multiplayer. So yeah, I don't have high hopes for the future of this franchise, but like I said, I did want to talk about what I think they do need to do to kind of win me and other Halo fans back. So with all of that said, guys, I would love to hear your thoughts on the current state of the Halo franchise in the comments below. Let me know if you agree or disagree with some of my takes. I'm absolutely open to hearing what you guys want. This is just one guy's opinion on the state of Halo, so be sure to sound off with your thoughts below and leave a like if you enjoy the video, and subscribe. Let me know if you'd want to see more Halo content from me and what specifically you would like to see. I'd love to talk about it more. Like I said, Halo is still one of my favorite franchises of all time, even if the modern iterations of it are not really my cup of tea. But with all of that said, I think that's going to be it for this one, guys, so I will see you all in the next one. Take care, guys.